morning. It's great to be here, and thanks for the introduction. What I wanted to do today is, I saw the program and it looks really interesting, and I know you're going to have some various discussions and deep dives into the topics that were mentioned by Michael as well. But I wanted to give you a bit of a big picture overview of what we think are the big changes that are coming down the tracks and how it's going to impact the business sector, society, but also government. And I also wanted to take a little look at how Ireland is doing in the context of these changes and what perhaps could be done better to really be at the forefront when it comes to adapt and prepare for these changes that are coming down the tracks. So with that, this is not the right slide. I wanted to really help you understand the fourth industrial revolution, or what we call the fourth industrial revolution. It is about not only individual technologies that are emerging, but also the convergence of those and the speed and scale and the impact that those technologies are having. The telephone took 75 years to reach 50 million users. The internet, 4 years, and Angry Birds, 35 days. So that just shows you how quickly really these changes are coming down the tracks, how they're impacting business models and government policies, but also society at large. The major disruptors of today, Airbnb, Uber, Alibaba, didn't even exist or were relatively unknown just a few years ago. The iPhone today has 2 billion users, and it was only created 2007. So that shows you the impact that these technologies and their adaptations have on the world and the way that we live and work today. And these changes are what we call the fourth industrial revolution. And I want to show you a quick video that just describes a little bit what that means and what, how it's going to impact the world. I want to illustrate some of those changes that were just shown on the video by two quick examples. One is the cost of the genome sequencing and the radical drop in those costs, and that applies to many technologies, how radically really the costs of these technologies and their development has progressed and advanced in the last few years. Here you see how, from just a bit over 10 years ago or so, the cost has radically dropped. It cost about 2.8 billion US dollars to complete the Human Genome Project. And today you can sequence genomes for about $1,000 in just a couple of days. So that really exemplifies how the cost and the reduction of cost, the rapid reduction of cost is impacting these developments. The second one is related to what I've mentioned before, this convergence of technologies, particularly as we look at the technology life cycles. And in the past, we had various cycles happening sort of as standalone cycles, whether that's the mainframe or the PCs, or even e-commerce and web 1.0. And today, we have the convergence of all of these different tech life cycles. Like here, you see the convergence of artificial intelligence, big data, IoT, mobile cloud. And this is what really makes today very, very different than, say, even just 5 or 10 years ago. One of the big questions is, of course, who gains from this? Who loses? And who are we in this entire development? Is it the robots or artificial intelligence that dictate the future, or what is the role that humans play? And for us, we need to really ensure that we see the benefits of this fourth industrial revolution. We also distribute them fairly, so that they do not just pertain to a few who are the advanced, or who have the technologies or who have the understanding of what is coming down the tracks, but that we use some of the incredible benefits and developments to really benefit everybody in this process. In terms of who loses, it's extremely important that we manage the externalities of these developments, because they will be there, and it will be important that we are doing this by design rather by default. And then as a last, third challenge, it is important that this development really remains also human-led and human-centered, and not driven by technology, but driven by humans and our, again, design of how we think the future should look like, rather than sort of being a bypass or a passenger in these developments. On one hand, there's a lot of conversations about the risks of what's coming down the tracks, about how artificial intelligence is going to, and robotics is going to steal all these jobs, and create sort of this really weird universe that we don't even know today. And of course, it could make our economic systems very fragile and volatile. It could render sort of all existing online security protocols useless. We could democratize the ability to make massive destruction of weapons. And Elon Musk has talked to the UN about how suddenly you could have this massive weaponization through these artificial intelligence and digital processes. But it could also really spur innovation and new forms of growth. It could inspire new data regulation and policies. It could help create a world that's more transparent, that's more inclusive, that's more gender equal. And what I think we want to show is that this future is very much a possibility if we are very conscious of where we want to go and how we want to use these opportunities in the future. Cyber risk, one of the major issues that we see in the future. Annually, there's $445 billion spent on this issue. And many, many nations and companies do not know how to deal with them. They work on them alone, and it's extremely important that companies and governments are much better prepared, because there are no boundaries for cybercrime. And it is something that we do need more collaboration on. We at the Forum actually have built a new center on cybersecurity just to deal with the global aspect of this issue and the need to bring people together and to provide a platform for discussion on what should be done, what is coming down the tracks, and how do we avoid some of the major attacks in the future, which could have, of course, a huge, huge impact. There's also the privacy paradox, and Stanford University and MIT did an experiment with students. When they did an experiment with Bitcoin, they gave students the option to give the email addresses of 3 of their friends in exchange for a pizza. And essentially everybody did it, even those that were very much proponents of privacy and securing people's data. So that just shows you how this talk about privacy and the need to protect private data has different aspects. And I think in the future we will have to look very differently at what privacy means to us, and perhaps we will no longer have the security of really truly private data or information. I wanted to give you a few examples of how these technologies are impacting industry and business, before I move also into looking at Ireland as a country. When we look broadly across various industries and various sectors, you can see how companies are using these the technologies and digital advancements really not only to benefit from the disruption, but also to really add service, to provide the value-added services. For example, Rolls-Royce, they're using real-time information on artificial intelligence to track the health of the engines worldwide, which is a huge benefit to their current customers. Siemens is using big data and IoT to process to use sensors and processing data in their factories. And TransferWise, some of you may know about, is really a massive cross-border platform, P2P platform, which now has more than £1 billion of transfers per month. So you can see how these technologies really also provide platforms with opportunities that were never there before. When we look at the agriculture sector, in the past, something that really had slowed in terms of the productivity and the growth and the opportunities that were available to that sector, today it is completely transformed, and the possibilities and potential is really huge. From the entire cycle of productivity, from the seeding, where now you can do genome editing to create the perfect crops, to the growing precision agriculture, where you use sensors to measure when and how much water or fertilizer you're using, to the harvesting through robots, where you only pick the crops that are ready to be picked. So you can see how across the entire life cycle or productivity cycle, even in just this one industry, technology has the potential to completely transform it. And particularly in countries in Africa or even Asia, this is really a game changer. And not even to speak about the mobile applications when you market these products, which are transformational. The healthcare industry, a $7.5 trillion industry globally. It is going to be completely revolutionized. Coming here yesterday, I was sitting on a plane next to a dentist who has an office here in Ireland, and he was saying he's now being eliminated as the third intermediary, because people here, I think you even have a company here in Ireland that's called Smile Direct, which now basically can help you with your dental products by just sending in information over the internet, and the web will basically do it. You don't need the doctors anymore, the dentists. The same with GPs that you can now have online access to. And those are just small examples. Of course, then it stretches to the sharing of data, the information, the genome sequencing. If any of you probably have done some of the DNA testing that you can do to find out if you're prone to certain or risks at risk for any of the diseases, and you can plan and prevent things in a much, much different way than you ever could before. Media companies completely disrupted one of those industries that really saw itself really at odds with what is happening. And here we see really the content, technology, and data pieces coming together. Those three things will be the things that will transform the media companies, and those who know how to combine those three in the future will be the ones that succeed. Automotive industry. We all know about Uber, car sharing devices, which now are the platforms that enable us to have a much different access to driving into cars. New materials like electric cars are shaping the way that the entire industry is running. And of course, in very heavily polluted environments or cities in China, but also in the rest of the world, you can see how this could have huge benefits. And then, of course, you have the artificial intelligence, sensors that help transform the aspect of self-driven cars, and you don't even need drivers anymore, and that then has a huge impact, of course, on jobs, which I will come to in just a minute. And just that small example shows you how, from just the transformation of the automotive industry, you can suddenly see how you could create an entirely seamless integrated mobility system where you connect the physical infrastructures, or the cars, the smart traffic, sort of the dynamic routing, the maintenance stations, with the energy infrastructure, about the charging networks, power generation, but also the foundational elements like the policies that are required to make sure that they operate seamlessly, the support on a fiscal level, and the consistent standards that are needed. With that, I want to take a small look also at, or a short look at the future of work and skills, because it is such an important element when we talk about the transformations that we're seeing. 1 in 4 adults today say they don't have the skills required to do their jobs. And of course, you can say every transformation or every particularly digital or technological revolution has brought huge advancements when it comes to jobs. In the 19th century, we had 90% of the jobs being done in the agricultural sector. Today, it's only about 2% globally. But what's very different in this revolution is that it's no longer just the blue-collar workers, but really the white-collar workers as well, like the dentists I talked about, the GPs, the lawyers that are being disrupted through artificial intelligence and all these services that we're seeing coming down the tracks. And the aspect of self-driven cars alone, when you look at the truck drivers, this is the example of the US, for example, where pretty much every state, the most common job in the US is a truck driver. What does that mean to reskill these people, to give them opportunities in the future? Because the prospect of jobs and an income is, of course, fundamental to society at large. And the rise of populism is not least also connected to the fact that people do not really see a future for themselves in this world. In terms of significant changes in skills, it's no longer just the technical ones, but really the emotional intelligence, critical thinking, judgment, and decision-making, which will matter and differentiate humans from the more robots or artificial intelligence jobs going forward. What does it mean for Ireland? Ireland ranks not badly when we look at our research in terms of the competitiveness report, where we rank all the big economies, or 137 countries globally. Ireland ranks 24th overall, and does quite well on the technological adoption, has definitely a high quality of primary education and health system, and also the quality of scientific research institutions is quite high in Ireland. But it does lack overall innovation, as you can see here. When you look here, the sort of lowest indicators across the board, and also business sophistication is maybe not as high as it could be, as well as labor market efficiency is a major aspect of this, and of course the financial market development is quite low, but that also has to do with the size of the economy. When you look at how well Ireland is prepared for this revolution, again, we have a couple of indicators. On the positive side, there's a good skills base in this country, particularly also digital skills, and there was also some other recent research which showed how well actually Ireland is doing on digital skills. The political and regulatory environment is strong compared to some of the other countries, and infrastructure also is relatively good. But affordability is an issue in Ireland. Knowledge-intensive jobs are not as many as there should be or could be. And the mobile network, just the basics, like mobile network coverage is not great across the country. Of course, in Dublin, it's very strong, but then when you go across the country, it's not as strong as it could be. And the usage, particularly also from the business sector and the government sector, is also not as strong as it could be and should be potentially going forward, while individual use is quite strong. So when you look at this, what are the implications for the business leaders and governments? And how can business leaders really change their organizations to be ready for this transformation? And what does it mean for policymakers and governments? On the business side, it's really about, are you able to innovate? And really experiment. I cannot emphasize enough how important experimentation is for businesses, and to test different approaches, particularly in this environment where these rigid structures are no longer going to work for the future developments. New business models are coming on board all the time. We need to be much better, or the business community needs to be much better in developing ecosystems of new partnerships with the academia, with governments, with other businesses in the industry. There's a massive cultural shift that is required to really think in new ways. Think about how artificial intelligence is going to disrupt us. Teach your employees what that means. Digital skills, I mentioned, a perennial issue that will be high on the agenda. And of course, data security, privacy, a big issue. On the government side, I would say it's really about creating these new regulatory structures that are much more agile and that can help really transform what we see today into much more benefits to society. Strategic investments in innovation, hugely important. We see it in France, how powerful these big investments can be when you really make an effort also from the top. Community impact and digital dividends are really important aspects one needs to continue. And for Ireland specifically also, the macroeconomic reform agenda is an important one for governments to stick to and really make sure the basics are implemented, like the infrastructure and educational transformations. That is it from my side. This is the kind of big picture overview of what I wanted to give you as input into your discussions today. And as you go into these deep dives and discussions on specific aspects of these transformations, I want you to keep in mind some of the big conceptual ideas that we have researched, and also how Ireland and how you can contribute to make sure Ireland really benefits from this transformation and also is at number one when it comes to being a digital leader.